Hello fellow Dungeon Masters, how nice to see you all return for part 2 of my Tips for New DMs, the mini-series. If you're not a returning DM, don't hesitate to check out part 1, which should appear on screen somewhere right now. Other than that, all I have to say before we begin is welcome to the Attic Dungeon. My name is Sam, and whether it's getting your session organized or not becoming a dungeon dictator, I'm here to help you with everything. So we continue our list of helpful insights for Dungeon Masters. Today we'll be talking about tools you can use as a Dungeon Master, the balance between giving your players what they want and knowing when to say no, adding consequences to player actions, and role-playing an entire world. I've given you quite a heap of info last time, but no way of organizing any of your sessions. What a cruel bastard am I? Let's fix that first. So you will be running entire towns, epic skirmishes, challenges and whatnot. You will need a way to organize your shenanigans. Now, there is no one true way of organizing your stuff. Each DM has their own style, but I'm going to go over some handy tools you can use. First thing you need, either a laptop or a pen and a notebook. Yes, laugh all you want, but you need somewhere to gather all your prep work and information, your notes during session and whatnot. In my case, it's a laptop. It's the same one I used to record. It is very truly my D&D laptop. But other DMs I know prefer using a notebook. I prefer the laptop because it also allows me to run background music and sounds that are relevant to the place where we are. And as we all know, the right music or the right sound at the right moment can really add to the atmosphere. But more importantly, the laptop allows me to access D&D Beyond. Now, I'm going to do my best not to turn this into an infomercial for D&D Beyond, but it is really a good platform to use, provided that you buy the books online. And herein lies my one critique towards the platform. There is no way that if you own a book in real life that you can also access this on D&D Beyond. There's no code to redeem or whatever. Why is this? It's because D&D Beyond is run by a different company. It's not owned by Wizard of the Coast, and obviously this company also wants to make some profit, so they sell the books online. I'm not a paper person, so I'm fine with that. I think I only owe 1 or 2 books in real life, which is why you don't see this really big shelf with all the books behind me like you do in some other shows. But I know that other people are really attached to paper books, and for them D&D Beyond is not an ideal situation maybe. But apart from that critique, and I will address it how you can kind of circumvent it in just a moment, it is really a very nice online platform. You can create characters online, you can create groups for your campaigns online where you as the DM can leave notes for your players. You can also access their character sheets, which is really handy if you need to check which spells are relevant. Maybe one of your players has a really niche spell and you want to give them the opportunity to use it. Really handy to access their sheets at that point. There's also an encounter creator. It's still in the beta version. For now you can create and store encounters, and obviously you can immediately check the monster files as well. In the future it is going to have an initiative and HP tracker as well, so that is going to be really handy. When I said you can create encounters there, you can indicate how many party members of which level you have, and the encounter creator will tell you whether or not the encounter is easy, normal, hard, or even deadly. Now you might say, but Sam, if everybody has to buy every book online in order to access it separately, that can be quite an expensive venture. Yes, it can, but you don't have to. If you have one account with a lot of content, you can get a subscription for it. The subscription costs around 60 euros a year, and it allows 2 things. One, the account gets an infinite amount of slots in the character creator, which is super handy for people like me who tend to spam builds online. 2, more importantly, you can share all the content with up to 36 people. My account on D&D Beyond has almost every book because I'm an absolute nerd. And I have an active subscription with around 10 people. That means that for about €6 each a year, they all get every book that I have, plus full character creator access and 6 character creation slots, I think, for a full year. If there is any excess money I get because people join in later, I just use that money to buy the few books that I don't have online. Easy solution to prevent everyone from spending hundreds of euros on books online. You can share the cost, make one master account, and then divide it. But in my case, I paid for all the books, and basically I just asked people if they want to get my shared content, and then they pay for it, and that money I used to buy more books. It's all good. Now, if you don't want to use D&D Beyond, that is super fine. You can get some really decent auto-fillable character sheets like D&D Beyond has. For your crew, add OrcPub, for example, and Cobalt Fight Club will be a good enough place to create your encounters, at least balance-wise. You can check there as well if your encounter is too hard, too easy, or whatever. What you don't get there is the full monster sheet, because then they would be infringing copyright, so they just refer to which book and which page you can find said monster in, while on D&D Beyond you can obviously click through to all of the sheets and you can hover over the abilities and what have you. Honestly, the most important step is to find out whether you're a paper person or a digital person and organize yourself as such. Do you want the physical books, a notebook and a pen? I don't care. Or you want the laptop as an all-powerful gateway to the D&D universe? That also works. Personally, I advise it because it's easy to keep everything together that way. Just make sure, whichever way you pick, have one location where you gather your prep work. Write all your notes in the same book, write all your notes in the same file somewhere on your laptop that you use. Important though, leave room to edit your notes. On a laptop that's easy, but in a notebook, I don't know, maybe write your prep on the left side and add stuff on the right side, notes during session, because as I've told you in the first part, players will mess up your preparation and you need to have room to adapt. So kind of split up your book, left side prep, right side notes, and that way you can always have room to adapt to what your players are up to that session. When it comes to combat, again, there are many different styles. The easiest and most new player friendly when it comes to rules and such is using the theater of the mind, which basically means you're going to describe combat and enemy and player positions, but like there's no battle grid on the table where you can actually see it. It's easy, it needs no material components, it's a bit lighter on the rules, it's easier for newer people, but using a grid adds more depth to a fight. Some players can appreciate that. I really like fighting on a grid, for example. That doesn't mean, however, you have to invest in 9,874 different maps to accommodate every fight. The desert, the ice plain, the forest, the town, whatever. You don't need that. The way I do it, I use whiteboards that are about this size and they have a pre-printed grid on them. I draw the relevant elements of the terrain on them and there you go, combat can begin. It's cheap, it's reusable, it's practical. I've used all sort of things from other games, by the way, to represent the enemies that are being fought. Last thing I used were some mini mahjong tiles because they have numbers on them and it makes it really easy to track which monster is what and to track their HP and initiative and whatnot. But again, the whiteboard grids are super practical. It's true, they make it maybe a bit harder to imagine the surroundings. There is no beautifully printed forest on my battle map. There is just an amount of shitty trees and shrubberies that I've drawn, but it works. And it makes it so that I have one bag downstairs, which is my D&D bag, and everything is in there. The 2 maps, my markers, my own sheets, my dice, and I'm ready to go. Also, when it comes to actually tracking stuff during combat like HP, initiative, armor class, conditions. Again, it depends on whether you're a digital or a paper boy. The paper boys, obviously on your sheet of paper, maybe have grid paper so you can write down numbers in the different cases and make it very nice to track. On computer, I use the simplest thing ever. I use Excel. I have a standard grid where I fill in HP and armor class of a monster. I can track damage, write conditions in a separate column, and Excel has the nice feature of being able to order stuff according to a certain number. So once I've entered the initiatives, I just tell Excel to order all the creatures according to highest initiative. And I'm ready. Again, super simple, but it really helps me organize my fights. Earlier I mentioned music. While usually I have some generic music playing in the background that will fit the area that my players are in, I have some nice town music, some swamp music, some forest music, you get the idea. There is music for every situation, whether it's supposed to be a funny or an exciting, thrilling situation. I would even say there is nothing wrong with using an iconic song at certain points in a campaign. If you're catering to the needs of a group of people who are all familiar with Skyrim, and let's be honest, who isn't, and they're going to fight their first dragon ever, use the Skyrim theme to introduce the fight. Play it while narrating the dragon entering the fray. Have those drums and those first voices play in the background. People will recognize the song. Excitement will build up. They'll be super hyped for the fight, and it will make it very memorable. Just let the song loop while they're fighting it. Another nice example of music being used is something I can give from a one-shot I ran myself. I had players enter a basement where there was an encounter with ghosts waiting for them. Not a combat encounter, more of a like puzzly exploration counter. I'll get into those in a different video at some point. But anyway, in the background there was this very eerily ghosty song playing with a lot of laughter and, you know, those ghost-like waltz music type of things, and it really added to the atmosphere. The players were in a ghost-filled basement at that point. There was no doubt about it. Music can enhance whatever you're trying to sell as a fantasy to your players. Players, the greedy little buggers want everything you have and more. They walk in soiling your perfect world with their crazy ideas and ambiguous morality. We must punish them all! I'm just kidding, really. The balance between giving and taking is one of the most delicate things in every campaign. It's the balance between your story and their story, and more importantly, the balance to make sure that everyone is having a good time. A lot of people are advocates of the most basic of improv rules when your players are asking something, and that is, don't say no, but say yes and or yes but. And on a general level, I agree with this. Allow your players to experiment and go along with it. Remember how I said to keep some space on the right of your notebook to write down the notes and what's happening during sessions? That's because you're going to say yes and or yes but in a lot of cases, and you need to adapt accordingly. Are players approaching a situation in a completely different way than you expected? Go with it. See where it leads you and them. Don't be hellbent on forcing them your way. Some beautiful things in my campaigns have happened because I just let my players take the wheel for a while. On the other hand, you should not be afraid to make clear when your players are going overboard. The simplest example I can give is the following one. It's not unheard of that players who frequent the city want to visit the local ladies of the red light district. Completely fine with that. Your human wants to pay money to bang an elf? Go ahead, not my problem. Don't expect me, however, to narrate your erotic encounter with said elf. It is not going to happen. And yes, these type of players exist. I've seen them, I've played with them, I've had other DMs tell me about them. You can find them more easily than you think. We are not here to indulge your erotic fantasies, dear human fighter. That's kind of where most DMs draw a line, and that is perfectly okay. Don't let your players force you into anything that you feel uncomfortable with. Talk to them. That solves a lot of stuff. Apart from extremer situations like that one, usually it's very doable to find a wonderful middle road between what your players are doing and what you want to do. Listen, observe, and improvise. Also, this is kind of important when it comes to magic items. Some players build a character with a specific magic item in thought. Personally, I wouldn't do that. I would never make a build rely on a magic item that I know I'm not going to obtain myself. Artificers are a bit of an exception there. And yes, players might ask you beforehand if it's possible to get this or that item. Talk about what they're up to. Why do they need this item? And if you think the reason is good and the build is not something that's going to break your campaign, you can design an entire quest around obtaining this item. That can be a nice party building experience, like one player really needs something and the others are going to help in obtain it. You can have some people from the past of the player's background visit. It can evolve into a really nice quest line. So again, don't be against it, but first talk about it with the player. If you think it's okay, work it into your campaign. If you think it's going to break everything, tell them no, but also tell them why not. Consequences. So, players have the right to feel powerful in your world and they get to make a lot of choices. But they should also know that choices matter and they can have consequences. An easy example, I think the easiest and maybe the most common example, is the dreaded chaotic neutral hero. The stereotype about this alignment is that it's often an excuse for the player to actually play an evil character more than a neutral character. They often display some random violence, but they never display random kindness or a just neutral stance as they could. At what point do you start attaching consequences to the behavior of such a player? Aren't you just punishing a player for having fun at that point? If you have a player character that is running amok and it is starting to mess up your game too much or he's taking too much liberty, the first thing you do is warn the player. This can be done both in character by having NPCs remark how the character is behaving in a bad way or he looks suspicious, or out of character by directly informing the player that the bad behavior is going to have consequences because you live in a world with laws and rules and actual people who care about what the world is looking like. If the player continues down this road, the dark path that is wanton destruction, apply consequences. Maybe some people refused to speak to the party because of what they did. Shops refuse service or demand insane prices. The law is looking for them. Bounty hunters are on their trail. There's loads of things you can do as minor consequences before shit gets real. Harder consequences might involve player character deaths as a result of becoming outlawed in general. These are all fair game as long as your players are A, warned, B, going overboard. On the same note, also reward players for being good. Don't just add consequences to being evil, add consequences to being good. Of course, this entirely depends on the type of campaign you're running. You could be running an evil campaign and then it kind of goes in reverse, but in most campaigns, your players are trying to help someone and they kind of have to behave while they're in town, so they have to learn how to keep a balance. Does this mean that you have to make them into a bunch of goody two-shoes? No, just try to keep them from murdering everyone in every little town they encounter. Now, I said reward good behavior as well, or interesting RP choices. Reward those, it's super fun. A DM that I play with rewarded me with a very small type of guidance buff because I restored a religious statue with my fighter at some point. The fighter is a very normal person, has normal beliefs, believes in his gods because they help protect his farm, and he restored one of the statues that he saw together with the cleric in the party, and they were rewarded for this nice little behavior by the god. Could also be that if your character has evil motivations, that an evil god rewards them. That is up to you and how it works, and especially up to the type of campaign that you're running. Now that I've briefly touched upon the concept of player character death, maybe we should elaborate a bit on it. As a rule, I'm okay with player character death, especially if it's combat related. If your characters are getting into dangerous situations on a daily basis, they know that death is a possibility. That doesn't mean that I am actively seeking to kill my players. I might want to knock them unconscious now and then, but I am never out to kill my players, but it has happened. I have rolled this amazing critical hit against a character who was low on HP and suddenly was dead. Warn your players beforehand in a session 0 that this is a possibility. But character death can also be non-combat related. I've already talked about bad behavior leading to character death, and it should be avoided as much as you can, but if it is your last resort, it's okay. But I've also had players making positive RP related choices that lead to their death. A player in one of my campaigns chose to stay behind and challenge the enemy leader because the party knew that he was very honor bound, and if challenged to a one-on-one fight he could not refuse. But they also knew that one character at this point was not strong enough to defeat this character. Yet the player made the conscious choice of staying behind and challenging the enemy leader to combat so that the rest could escape. This is positive choices leading to character death, and they can result in really memorable moments. So it's not always bad if a character dies, and you shouldn't feel bad about it. Make sure that it happened because of a logical reason, and worst case, briefly beforehand, if you see it coming, just hand a note to the player that says, is it okay if you die here? If the player is completely opposite to the idea of the character dying, time to find a solution. But often if players are making these choices, they know that this is a risk and they're willing to accept it. Go for it. It can make for beautiful moments. And you can reuse the dead corpse later as a warning to the rest of the party. Hey! Nobody has a more challenging RP job than the DM. You're in charge of running an entire world and making the characters in it come alive. This, I believe, is one of the most daunting tasks of the DM, partially because people want to live up to a certain standard. There's loads of recorded games on YouTube featuring amazing DMs that can RP 12 characters at the same time per minute. As usual, I'm telling you to relax. No one expects you as a new DM to voice the entire Muppet cast on your own. When it comes to role-playing NPCs, making sure you know what the character is like can help you in this case to do the simple RP that is necessary to run your first campaign, your first one-shot, whatever. In the first video, I told you that for planned NPCs, it is often enough to write down 3 characteristics to kind of decide who they are and how they function. If you make sure that one of those 3 relates to how they react to people in general, you'll already have a strong idea on what to do when it comes to RPing them. Start by using simple words to describe their general attitude. Cheery, grumpy, stern, pompous, humble, confused. These are just simple emotions you can act out without having to do any real voice work. Though you will discover that by starting out with these simple emotions and acting on them, your voice will kind of adapt to them, and you will slowly but surely work your way towards the more complex emotions, behaviors, and what have you. Evolving into more complicated stuff and accents takes some time, especially if you're not used to acting or doing any voice work, and it's perfectly okay. Take your time. As long as you feel safe at your table, you should be able to evolve your role-playing as your campaign moves along, and that's perfectly fine, because for your players it's probably going to be the same thing. Even better, you as a DM putting effort into your NPCs and making your world come alive might inspire your players to do the same thing, to put some more effort into RPing their character. And if one of your players is doing an amazing job at RPing a character and you think, oh my god, I'm absolute beep at this, remember, they only have to do one character that they have to repeat every session. You're doing a dozen every 2 hours, so don't get discouraged because of this. Hang in there, find what type of role-playing works best for you. There's obviously 2 ways. The easy way to begin with is even easier than actually trying to act out the emotions. You can probably just describe what a certain NPC is doing. For example, oh, the mayor answers to you in a very pompous way that he will not tolerate a lot of you in his 9th mansion. There's very little emotion coming from me at that point, though my players know perfectly how the mayor is acting, and by just acting adding a bit of facial expression and a bit of body motion, you're already adding stuff. Obviously, the more complicated way is using those emotions and talking as if you are the character. Makes perfect sense. Once you move into the more advanced stuff, you want to do stuff like combining your voice together with your face, your hands, your shoulders, basically anything above table level that your players can see. You can add certain quirks to characters. Maybe if we go back to that same pompous mayor, he always holds his hand like this while he's talking, and he's very airy in talking and goes all the way like la-di-da. I don't know. It's simple stuff, but tiny gestures help you embody the character you're trying to show your players, especially if it's a recurring NPC. I don't expect you to work out every 5th farmer they encounter at a market. That's going to be a pretty impossible job. For those one-time NPCs, I'm thinking of vendors or just NPCs part of one encounter. You can limit yourself really to picking one word. How do they react? Obviously, if it's somebody being safe, they're going to be super thankful, but maybe other characters they encounter are going to be a bit more grump-like, and that's okay. Just pick one word and act on that. Don't spend too much time thinking on how to RP those one-time characters. And that's about all the time we have for today again. So I hope you're feeling even more inspired to start DMing than you already were after the first movie. If you still have questions about being a dungeon master, ask them. We'll do our utmost best to answer them, and by we I really just mean me. I mean, I'm all alone in an attic, what's going to happen? Anyway, if you like my ideas, my talk, my walk, don't hesitate to subscribe to my attic dungeon, to leave a like, click the bell, you know how it works, and if everything goes well, I'll see you again next time in the attic dungeon.